Hello, everyone. Do you ever have a book that shows up that you really, really want to read? And so you are going to drop everything and make a vlog around it? I guess if you don't vlog, then you would never have that happen. But for me, that book is this one, James by Percival Everett. I saw this book for the first time, I believe it was last year. Was it on the Goodreads Choice Awards or something along those lines? And I really, really wanted to read it, and I just haven't had a chance yet. It was hard to get at our library for a while, and so then I finally ordered it this summer, and it arrived. So I wanted to read this book, and I wanted to vlog it. Essentially, this is a reimagining of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, but told through the point of view of Jim, who is the enslaved man who goes with Huckleberry Finn. So that's kind of the general gist of this one. Now, I did read Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, way, way back, I believe in high school. And it has been a long time since I read it. And I know people have said that you don't need to read it in order to read this one, but I thought, you know what would be super interesting would be to reread the original and then read James and just see what the difference, like what the major differences are, and see how Percival Everett reimagines the story. And I am really looking forward to this one. I'm hoping that I like it because there's some other of Percival Everett's books that I am interested in also trying. So anyways, that's what I'm going to do for this vlog. I'm going to reread The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and then I'm going to read James by Percival Everett. And I will let you know my thoughts on those two books as I read them. This is going to be hopefully a relatively quick vlog because I only have the two books to read. And my library book is due back at the library right away. So I'm hoping that I can get that done in short order. And I will let you guys know once I've gotten a little ways into Huckleberry Finn. And I'll let you know what my thoughts are on that story. Like I say, it's been years since I read it. Update time. I've been reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and I have gotten to page 64 so far. So this is an interesting one. I do remember reading this way back in like either high school or university. I can't remember which. And it is definitely of its time. I will say that. There's a lot of language in it that I don't feel comfortable with. A lot of use of the racial slur. I'm curious to see what Percival Everett does in James, because in this book, the slave, Jim, is made out to be highly superstitious, not very smart, all those kinds of things, which I know was often the way the enslaved people were portrayed. So I'm really curious to see what Percival Everett is going to do with James's character, because he is a very interesting character and quite resourceful and all those kinds of things, but he is portrayed as highly superstitious and very less intelligent than a lot of other characters. However, Huck thinks that he is a good companion, so that's part is the way it is. So essentially in this story, you're following Huckleberry Finn. You meet Huckleberry Finn in the Tom Sawyer book, which I haven't read. I don't think I've ever read Tom Sawyer. But you meet Huckleberry Finn in that one. And he is, at the end of that one, he is living with this widow in the little town. She's looking after him, and his father is gone. He comes from a family with an abusive father. And in this one here, his father ends up coming back and essentially kidnapping him and taking him away to this cabin where he keeps him there and threatens him. And Huck doesn't mind living there for the most part, except that then his father kind of starts to go a little nuts and threaten him and stuff. And he doesn't like getting daily beatings either. So Huck fakes his own death and takes off down the river. And when he gets to this island that's in kind of in the middle of the river that nobody goes to very often, he comes across Jim, who is the widow's sister's slave. And Jim has heard that the widow's sister is going to sell him down to New Orleans, so he decided to escape. And he happened to escape on the same night that Huck faked his own death. So now there's people in the community who think that he must have been responsible. So he and Huck decide that they're going to head off down the river together in order to escape. And that's kind of where I'm at now. They're on their way down the river, and you're just kind of hearing about their adventures as they go. So it's not a hard read in any way, other than that, like I said, I'm finding the language a little bit hard. Everything is written pretty much in dialect, Huck's dialect and Jim's dialect and everything, which makes it a little bit harder to read, just because you're constantly having to kind of infer what they're meaning from the dialects and stuff. But I know that was kind of part of the point of the book, was to show these different dialects and everything as per the introduction. But I do find that makes it a little bit more difficult to read. But anyways, I'm going to continue that one. And like I say, I'm just refreshing myself on the story because I'm really curious to read James. And I will let you know when I get a little further what my thoughts are. for a little update. So I have been reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I've now gotten to chapter 21, which is page 130, so I'm getting close to halfway. And I'll just say this is definitely has some thought-provoking elements to it. Again, like I mentioned in the previous update, the language is very archaic. And although I know that is how they spoke back then, it's very, very jarring to read. I can understand why a book like this would be banned nowadays. Let's just put it that way. But it does have some thought-provoking elements. And one of them that I just wanted to bring up that I thought was really interesting and worth talking about was you've got Jim and Huck, and they're traveling on this raft. They're escaping, and Huck is obviously helping Jim. But Huck has been raised in the South. He's been raised that good people, like the widow who was looking after him and her sister who owned Jim, were good people. And he doesn't really know any better. So when Jim starts talking about escaping and becoming free, and then he talks about, it says here, Jim talked out loud all the time while I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state, he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent. And when he got enough, he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived. And they would both work to buy the two children. And if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. So this is what Jim's plan is, right? He wants to get to freedom, then he wants to save up money and buy his wife's freedom and then buy their children's freedom, which makes total sense to us, right? Well, Huck, because he has been born and raised in the South, he thinks that that's wrong. In his mind, what Jim is saying is the crime, not the fact that people are owning his children. So like Huck says here, with a few modifications for the wordage, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this slave, which I had as good as helped to run away, coming right out flat-footed and saying he would steal his children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man that hadn't ever done me no harm. And then he says, I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever, until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. So he basically, when he decides to do what he thinks is right, which is to tell the authorities about Jim, then he starts to feel lighter. But then when it comes right down to it, he respects Jim enough that he's not going to turn him in. But the whole thing just struck me when I was reading that part, that you wonder often how people can get sucked into things like that and how people can believe something. Now, I just recently read The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and there are moments that are described in that book that I know are accurate to the kinds of things that happened, that I can't imagine any person in their right mind in any way assuming that was proper and acceptable. Some of the ways that the slaves were killed and those sorts of things. But you wonder, how could somebody get so brainwashed that they would think that? And then you read a story like this and you think about these children who are growing up in this world where slavery is a normal thing, owning people is a normal thing. They're taught not to look at the slaves as humans or not as at the same level as them. So they're more taught to look at the slaves as, say, like animals. And that's what you're growing up in as a young person at an impressionable age. And so in some ways, it doesn't shock me that that the young people would have gone along with a lot of this stuff. Whereas like nowadays, when we look at that, it's like, it's so obviously wrong. And if you were a young person who had been raised, say, in the North and been taught that was wrong, then you would have thought it was wrong as well. But in the South, they were taught that slaves were property, they were owned by people, they could be sold, all that kind of stuff. And so when Huck realizes that Jim is talking about buying back his wife and then stealing their children back, where we think this is totally acceptable and necessary, and go Jim, we'd rather have you save your family. Why are you thumping, Eeyore? Why are you thumping? Where we would think that that was the totally acceptable and the right thing to do, Huck as a character being raised in the South is all of a sudden like, oh no, he's going to steal these slaves that belong to this other guy who's never done me any harm. What have I done, kind of thing. And I just find that that's an interesting talking point. Like, it's one of those things that your mind is still going like, dude, they're people. You're talking about selling people and owning people. But at the same time, you can kind of see how when a child was raised in that, that would be what their mindset would be. And I do like the way that Mark Twain uses that to kind of juxtapose right and wrong, and show how what was seen as right in the white South was so very wrong. But a character like Huck, who's kind of your main character and is like trying to learn how to do what's right, is very confused because he doesn't see Jim as just a slave or a lower class person, but he also doesn't see Jim as an equal. And so it's very interesting reading that, and reading from the point of view of the person who is struggling with those things, even though when you really give it thought, it's like, okay, like you're talking about human beings here, kind of thing. So anyways, that makes for a very, very interesting read, and just some thought-provoking things that I found in there. Again, I'm really curious to go and read James by Percival Everett as soon as I'm done this one, because I am really curious to see what he does with Jim's point of view. And like I know I had mentioned before too, in this one, to me it seems a lot like when Mark Twain is writing Jim, he's portraying him as very uneducated and very backwoods and very superstitious and all those sorts of things, which he may have been. It's hard to say. He may have been superstitious, and he probably wasn't educated, because they didn't educate slaves back then in a lot of places. Although I'm curious to see what he does with it. I just know in the Underground Railroad, she talked quite a bit about how the Caesar, the slave that Cora escapes with, he had grown up further north and had been educated, and so once he got down to Georgia, it was like so hard for him to handle the fact that if he was found with a book, they would kill him. Like, that's how it was. You didn't educate slaves the further south you got, because an educated person was more likely to be seen as an equal, and more likely to you couldn't mask it and convince yourself that these people weren't as intelligent as you if you educated them and they were as intelligent as you. Like, it's one of those things where, and it's typical of a lot of class structures, where the more you keep somebody down, the more you can convince yourself that you're better than them, even though you guys are all just human beings. And so, yeah, anyways, it's a lot of interesting thoughts that I'm having as I'm reading these books. And I definitely am going to continue. I will let you know when I get further. I'm hoping to maybe finish it in the next day here so that I can get on to reading James. So I will let you know when I get there. So last night I finished this one, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I ended up giving it 2 stars. This one was kind of hard for me to rate because I'm just really not sure what to say about the experience of reading this book in 2025. As you know, I started reading it just as a refresher before I read James, but I definitely can't say that I enjoyed reading it at all. I thought it could lead to like interesting talking points, like I had mentioned before about Huck's dilemma when he's trying to decide whether to help Jim or not, and those kinds of things. And the idea that you have these people who see themselves as fundamentally decent humans, but can be, and even see themselves as like religious people who are supposedly kind and all those sorts of things, and yet they can do such horrible things to other people. And it's like when I read Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, I was honestly left like looking at, like I was giving the human race the bombastic side eye, like, to be honest, because it was just like, and then some of the other things that I've read recently and some podcasts that I listened to, and it just makes you wonder, like, how can people, I don't understand how people can consider themselves even remotely decent human beings and then treat people the way that they do and the way that that the slaves were treated. I thought that one thing that was interesting was reading the way that Huck questioned whether he was going to hell or not because he was helping Jim when Jim was considering wanting to escape to freedom and then buy his wife and rescue his kids. Like, so it makes you kind of think about the world that these kids were raised in and how that colored everything that they saw. Like, for them to actually, for a child to actually be like legitimately wondering if it's right or wrong, or if he's going to hell or whatever, for helping a fellow human being is just astounds me. I did find the book quite wandering. I've thought that the whole section with the king and the duke was quite humorous, but also had a lot to say about human nature. But all that said, I really disliked the way that the book infantilized Jim and made him come across as stupid and superstitious. I thought that the portrayal of pretty much all of the slaves was poorly done that way. For example, the old man who brings Jim food when he's at the Phelps's place, like that guy, he was basically comic relief for how foolish he was. Like, I found it just was hard to read, and I struggled also with having to read the N-word every couple of sentences. I get that was of its time, but having just finished reading Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, which also makes a lot of use of that word, which, I mean, in that case, it's written by a person of color and they're accurately portraying how things were. So that's like a little bit different for me, but having just read that one and then reading this one where it was like continuous use of the N-word, it just got a little much for me, definitely. And like, I get that this book is supposed to be like this satirical look at life in the South and in the pre-Civil War South. And I get that that's what it's supposed to be, but I just find that like the message gets lost in, it's so deeply buried under these one-dimensional characters and the racist portrayals of the slaves, and then the difficult to understand dialects that he uses and everything. So I definitely think that the book served a purpose for its time. But I think it might be time to just shelve it, not keep reading this one as a classic. I get that it inspired a lot of other authors over the years and a lot of modern literature. It was inspired by the way Mark Twain wrote. But I just find that this particular book, there's so many elements of it that are questionable. I don't feel like it should be taught below university level, for one thing, for sure, because young people in high school and that are so impressionable, and you never know what they're going to take from it. Whereas at least in university, if you're learning this one, you can have discussions about those deep topics and about slavery and everything. But so many high schools, they don't go that deep. And I really don't think this should be taught in high school anymore. I think it should be reserved for university literature classes, maybe. But that's my thoughts on it. It was definitely interesting to reread it after all these years. And now I'm going to go ahead and start on reading James and see what Percival Everett does with the story and with the character of James. So I will let you guys know once I've read a little bit in that one, what my feelings are so far. Everyone, I thought while I'm making my lunch here, I would just fill you in on reading James. Making myself some noodles. So last night I read the first 60-some pages of it, and I definitely am enjoying it more than reading the original. I really like the way that Percival Everett has taken the way that Jim speaks in the Huckleberry Finn book and turns it into a James is an educated slave. He has taught himself how to read and everything, and the slaves speak a certain language to the white folks as opposed to what they speak when they're with each other, and it's all done in order to kind of make them seem stupid and slow to the masters, while they're actually quite educated and smart, and they have all kinds of interesting discussions. And he has been sneaking into the judge's library and reading, and so he reads all this philosophy and these kinds of things. And so it makes his character so much more layered and interesting. Whereas in the other book, he was so just flat and one-dimensional. He was so flat and one-dimensional in the original. I also like the layers that he's given Huck's character. In the original, Huck is just kind of this boy who is out for adventure and all this kind of stuff. And you hear about the horrible things that he's going through with his father and everything, but you don't, it doesn't have like a huge effect on his personality and everything. and the way he's questioning things and all that. Like, I mean, it does, but not to the same depth. But Percival Everett has taken that character and really worked that into his character, where he's questioning everything, and he's talking to James because he considers him a friend, and he's trying to get advice on, how life works and all those sorts of things. So I really like his character better too. And just overall, so far, I'm enjoying it a lot more, and I'm looking forward to continuing reading that one. I'm going to try and hopefully even finish it maybe today, because it is a fairly fast read. So, I'm about 20% into it now, but it is, like I say, quite fast. So anyways, that's where I'm at with that one, and I'll let you guys know when I get further. I am definitely preferring that one. And there's not nearly as much use of the N-word. There's a few places where the white people say it, but there's not, it's not constant like every second line like in the original. So anyways, I will let you guys know when I get a little further along in that. Hopefully there won't be too much wind noise here. I've got the fan on because it's a little warm. We're about to get some thunderstorms tonight. It looks like there's some lightning going on outside. But I wanted to update you guys on where I'm at with James. I am now at chapter 30, which is page 170. I'm really enjoying this book. I like this so much better than the original. It's, for one thing, it's so much more realistic. In the original, it's like this big adventure kind of thing that they're going on, but there's no semblance of like actual danger and things to Huck and Jim. And I mean, this is an escaped slave going down the Mississippi. Like, there'd be a lot of danger. And this is so much more realistic. I love James's character. He is so multifaceted and layered, so interesting. I really enjoy Huck's character in this so much better than in the original as well. There's a lot more depth and nuance to his character as well that I'm really, really enjoying. And I have to say, I really enjoy Percival Everett's writing in general. Like, he makes you think a lot, and I'd like to read some more of his stuff. I mean, assuming that this ends decently and I enjoy the ending, I definitely want to read more of his stuff. But there's just a couple lines here that really stuck out to me that I wanted to mention here. This is, at one point, James comes across some books, and since he can read, he keeps them, and he's looking through them. And one of them is a Bible. He says, "And so after these books, the Bible itself was the least interesting of all. I could not enter it, did not want to enter it, and then understood that I recognized it as a tool of my enemy. I chose the word enemy, and still do, as oppressor necessarily supposes a victim." And to me, that was just such an interesting thought, because you think about how much evil is done in the world in the name of religion. And you think about how so many of the people who owned slaves in the South were religious people. Like, they believed that they were following God and doing what was right and all this kind of stuff. And yet they would abuse other human beings and just do terrible, horrible things. And they would twist things in the Bible to justify themselves. And it makes me think a lot, because I've mentioned it a couple of times before, but I grew up in a pseudo-Christian cult. And I have a very complex relationship with the Bible myself. And that's in large part because the leader, who was the head abuser, he twisted the Bible around to fit his purposes all the time. He used it to subjugate women. He used it to take away our voices. He used it to try and prove that he was the only one who heard from God and all this kind of stuff. And so to me, I have a very complex relationship with the Bible, regardless of what my current beliefs are. I just have a very complex relationship with it. And when Jim says that I could not enter it, did not want to enter it, and then understood that I recognized it as a tool of my enemy, that to me just rings home, because I often feel like, even 20 years after getting out of that cult, I feel like I can't enter the Bible without having those twisted thoughts come back, and those things that abuser said and did come back. And so it's very interesting. And I just thought that, in particular in the historical context, and then even if you think about like today, even the number of things that are done in the name of religion, and people think that they're being so upright and righteous, and yet and it doesn't matter what religion, there's lots of religions around the world that are like this, but at the same time, they're killing other people, or taking away people's freedoms, or attacking people for being different, and all this kind of thing. And it just that particular line just really struck me. And then another one that I thought was super interesting here was this just shows, I think, the interesting way that Percival Everett writes. It says, deep in the night, from deep in the forest, I heard the barking and howling of hounds. I pulled myself into an even tighter ball atop the tree roots that had become my bed. There was a mama raccoon that lived in that tree. She had taken to walking past me nonchalantly in the darkness. Tonight she stayed in the tree, high above me, listening to the dogs. We were both animals, and we didn't know which of us was the prey. We accepted that we both were. I considered running, leaving my raccoon friend, but in which direction does one run from lightning? Like, wow, that is such a... It's beautifully written, it's deep, and it's haunting. Like, I am really enjoying this book so far. And like I say, I'm finding that the characters are so much more interesting. I like the fact that the king and the duke characters are so much more sinister in this version. In the other version, like, they're con men and everything, and that they don't have good intentions, but they're portrayed as kind of humorous, whereas in here they're very sinister. And I much prefer the way that both James and Huck react to them in this version. It does definitely stray from the original storyline, which I kind of expected it to, but this I'm finding the storyline in this one so much more interesting. It's so much more there's a lot more plot to it than the other one, which was quite meandering and slow. So anyways, that's my updates for now. I'm going to try and finish this one here now. Like I say, I'm at 170 some pages, but it's reading quickly. So I'm going to try and finish it while I watch the lightning out the window. And I will let you guys know when I'm done. So last night, during that very intense storm, I finished reading James by Percival Everett. I loved this book. It was so good. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I think he did a wonderful job of creating characters that were 3-dimensional, as opposed to, like, way more 3-dimensional than the original characters in the original book. James's character was so interesting and layered. I really enjoyed all of the different aspects of his character, and his character arc was quite interesting. Watching how his experiences changed the way he reacted to things, and at the end, he was... I don't want to, like, no spoilers, it's totally spoiler free, but at the end, he was such a different character than he was at the very beginning. And I just loved that. I really liked Huck's character in here. Percival Everett turned him less from being like just this boy on an adventure who is having fun at the expense of others and all those sorts of things, and more so into a character that actually had some depth and had reasons why he was really running away, and had more of a deeper relationship with Jim, and I really liked that. He made for a much more likable character, because in the original I didn't really like his character that much. He was kind of a bratty, annoying child. But in this one, he was much different. And I also really liked the way that Percival Everett took all the aspects of like the king and the duke and all that, and turned it into something so much more sinister. Because in the original, they were kind of just like comic relief sort of thing, and you knew they weren't good people, but they weren't like you didn't get the feeling that they were really sinister people so much. Whereas in this one, he turned them into good villains. Like I really enjoyed that whole part of it. And he got rid of some of the parts in the original that I thought were very unbelievable. This one was so much more realistic than the original. I will say that you do not need to have read the original in order to enjoy this one. I just wanted to see what the differences were, because it had been so long since I had read the original. This one stands on its own as a really good book. I can see why it has such a high rating on Goodreads. I gave it 5 stars as well. Such a good book, such a good writer. His writing was so, he just had such thoughtful writing and really made a person think about a lot of things, and really stirred emotions in people. And I'm definitely going to read more Percival Everett. I really liked this one. And if you're going to read one of the two, I recommend this one, because it was much better, in my opinion, than the original story. So that's my thoughts on that. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments if you have any thoughts about any of the topics that I brought up. I'm very curious as to what other people think about those lines that I read and everything. And also, if you're planning on reading this one, and have you read the original, and what were your thoughts on it? Oh, I was also going to mention, both this one and the original were described as funny. Like this on the back here, the one person says, James is funny and horrifying, brilliant and riveting. There's funny, wise, gracious. And I read some other thing where it was like darkly funny and all that. And then the original was described as a humor book. And I honestly did not really find humor in either of them. They were good stories, like, well, especially this one was a good story, but I didn't really find humor in a lot of it. I thought it was deep and dark and interesting read, and an interesting adventure and all that. But I didn't find anything really funny in it personally. So that's my thoughts on that. Anyways, yeah, let me know down in the comments if you have read this and what you thought of it. And I will see you guys soon on another video. Bye.